themselves by saying, we are the chosen people of Allah, we are the beloved of Allah, we have this special favor with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala compared to all of the other people. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as you saw, as you heard last week in the previous ayahs, He rebuked them and refuted them for worshipping other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and preferring or encouraging those mushrikun of Mecca, those who worship the idols other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continues to rebuke them. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala begins in this ayah by saying, أَمْ لَهُمْ نَصِيبٌ مِّنَ الْمُلْكِ فَإِذَا لَا يُؤْتُونَ النَّاسَ نَقِيرًا. Do they have control over the shares of the kingdom? If so, they would not have given anyone so much as a speck on a date stone. Right? So this continuation of reprimanding those people. We said who they were. Some of the people of the book, Bani Israel falls into that. Sometimes the Nasara also fall into this. So as you heard last week, this is a continuation. Allah is asking them if they have a share in the dominion, meaning do you have a share in the mulk, the kingdom of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What is the kingdom of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? It is the fact that He owns every single thing that exists. Everything that exists is His kingdom, is His mulk. And it's also His authority. He decides what to do in that kingdom, in that creation. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who decides who will get messengership, nubuwwah, who will He favor with prophethood, which nation He will favor with messengers and books, revelation. This is all from the perfect knowledge and wisdom and absolute decision and sovereignty of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asks them, do you have a share? Do they have a share in this authority that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has? Do they have a share in this kingdom that they can decide where to give the favors and the treasures and the bounties of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? So this is a rhetorical question. It's not a question to ask them for an answer. It's a rhetorical question that is for the purpose of censuring, rebuking and condemning them, because they do not have, nobody has a share in the dominion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in His kingdom, in His authority, in His decision making of who to choose as messengers, who to favor with revelation, with wahi, or with rizq, or His bounties, or His favors. No one has the decision authority to make that in alongside Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So he said, even if they had that, even if they had some share in the kingdom, even if they possessed some authority, if Allah gave them some authority, فَإِذَا لَا يُؤْتُونَ النَّاسَ نَقِيرًا. If so, they would not have given anyone so much as the speck on a date stone. These people, even if they shared in the kingdom, the bounties, the treasures, the unlimited wealth of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they would not give people even so much as the speck on a date stone. The small speck on the date stone. They would not even give that. Meaning, if they had all of that, especially to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because the context is that both Bani Israel and the Nasara, the Christians and the children of Israel, both groups at the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, both groups in general, there were some who believed, some who became Muslims, but in general, both groups denied the truth of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam this context, but don't expect them to believe you. Don't expect them to have some kind of favor towards you. Because even if they had the dominion, authority to choose who to give what favors to, what wealth to, what rizq to, what wahi, what nubuwwah to, you'd be the last person they'd give to. This is the similar to the other statements of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. More general statements. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, قُلْ لَوْ أَنْتُمْ تَمْلِكُونَ خَزَائِنَ رَحْمَةِ رَبِّي إِذًا لَأَمْسَكْتُمْ خَشْيَةَ الْإِنفَاقِ. Say, if you possessed the treasure of the mercy of my Lord, then you would surely withhold it out of fear of spending it. This is the nature of the human being. No matter how much wealth is given to the human being, they become stingy. In fact, this is the experience of most people. Most charitable people are from, you will find the ordinary people. Maybe the poor people, and then slightly above them, maybe up to the middle strata of society in terms of income. You will find them most generous, most charitable, most willing to sacrifice. Majority of Sahaba were rich or poor, but they sacrificed everything. They gave away whatever they had. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in another part of the Qur'an, say to them, if you possess the treasure, khaza'in, all of the treasures of your Lord. You know, what are the treasures of my Lord? It's unlimited. You would, even then, you would not spend because you think it's going to run out. No matter how much you have, like Prophet ﷺ said, if Bani Adam was given a valley full of gold, what would he wish? He wished that he had another valley full of gold. He will wish that he had another valley full of gold. The human being is never satisfied. This is the general principle, general rule. It's the nature of the human being. It takes effort, mujahada, striving to overcome that nafs, which wants to cling to the dunya, which wants to cling to the temporal, which wants to cling to the material possessions of the now. بَلْ تُؤْثِرُونَ الْحَيَاةَ الدُّنْيَا. Nay, rather you prefer the fleeting life of this world. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that you wouldn't even spend if you had the treasures of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And in another ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَكَانَ الْإِنسَانُ قَتُورًا. And man is ever qatura, meaning bakhil, stingy. Man is stingy. This is something within his nature. So there's also a subtle indication here that due to these qualities, previous ayahs and this one, the bad qualities, not good qualities, bad qualities of self-elevation, tazkiyah to their own nafs, saying we are pure, we are favored by Allah, we have been forgiven, we are the chosen people, we are the sons of God, we are the beloved of God. This quality, the injustice, selling any portion of revelation just for a small gain in the dunya, like we mentioned last week, and miserliness, injustice and miserliness, stinginess. These are the qualities that those people have, and Allah is indicating that they are not deserving of having power and dominion in the land. They are not deserving of having power, authority in the land. But this is a lesson for us too. It's not just for Ahlul Kitab, not just for Nasara or the Christians or the tribe of Israel. It's not just for them. The lesson for believers, Muslims, if you have these problematic qualities of self-elevation, you make claims about yourself which are beyond the truth and reality. If you are involved in injustice, wherever you go, you can't do justice to other people. And if you are stingy, miserly, withholding your wealth, you're not generous. If you have these qualities, then don't expect Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give you any power or authority or dominion or His favors on the earth. So you have to have the opposite qualities. You have to have justice. You have to have humility. Don't self-elevate yourself. You have to have humility as believers. You have to establish justice in your own lives, those that are around you, those that are near you, relatives, family, friends, organizations that you work with, and your community. You have to establish justice. You have to be just. And most of all, you have to be generous. with your wealth, with your time, with your skills, with whatever you possess, helping others, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will elevate you in the land. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in ayah number 54, أَمْ يَحْسُدُونَ النَّاسَ عَلَى مَا آتَاهُمُ اللَّهُ مِنْ فَضْلِهِ فَقَدْ آتَيْنَا آلَ إِبْرَاهِيمَ الْكِتَابَ وَالْحِكْمَةَ وَآتَيْنَاهُمْ مُلْكًا عَظِيمًا. Or do they envy the people for Allah's bounties? Indeed, we have given the descendants of Ibrahim alayhi salam the book and the wisdom, along with great kingdom or authority. Meaning, if you see, this ayah begins with and the previous ayah also begins with lahum, both. So in a way, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that, what is leading them to deny the truth of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, to be in rejection of the wahi, in rejection of his nubuwah? What is leading them to it? Is it the first ayah? Yeah, that their miserliness, that they wouldn't give anything out? Is it that? Or is it this, the ayah is saying? Is it their envy? Is it because of envy they want to deny the truth? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that one of these two. Is it one of these two? The first ayah can also be interpreted as, is it that they have a share or mulk, kingdom, share of the kingdom, and then they can give it out to whom they please? Like, do they think, because they're not happy with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who He chose as a messenger, do they think they have that authority to give messengership to who they please? And if they had it, they would give it to whoever they please, meaning who they think is deserving. Is it because of this they reject the truth? Or is it because of envy? Do they simply envy the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam and sent the final messenger amongst the Arabs? Is it because of the envy that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has favored other people rather than them on this occasion? Well, if that's the case, أَمْ يَحْسُدُونَ النَّاسِ, or do they envy the people? One of the commentators says that this in reality means they are saying to themselves, we are the most worthy people rather than anybody else. The messengership, the prophethood should have come to one of us. Well, if they're saying that, well, then Allah preferring some over others with His prophethood and favors and blessing is nothing new. In fact, He blessed your people too with the same, and in fact for a longer time. Ahlul Kitab, the Christians had Isa alayhi salam, Bani Israel had so many messengers. Ibrahim alayhi salam is mentioned here, and then so many messengers after him, even though he wasn't from Bani Israel, but they attribute themselves to that lineage. Well, it's nothing new. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has been doing this with different people. He sends messengers to whom He wants. But you people who are envious that the messenger is not from amongst you, the wahi did not descend upon one of you, why are you envious? You've had so many messengers. You've had so many books. You've had so much kingdom and power and dominion over people. Well, it's the same God, same Allah who is sending His messenger, His wahi, His revelation, and choosing another messenger from another nation as He had done in the past. But you had a huge share of this favor of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why would you reject out of envy? It doesn't make sense. This is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reminds them, فَقَدْ آتَيْنَا آلَ إِبْرَاهِيمَ الْكِتَابَ وَالْحِكْمَةَ وَآتَيْنَاهُمْ مُلْكًا عَظِيمًا. That indeed we have given the descendants of Ibrahim alayhi salam the book and wisdom, along with great authority. One of the hadiths says that Bani Israel, they were never without a messenger. One messenger would pass. Sometimes they had 2-3 messengers at the same time. Whenever one messenger passed away, Whenever one messenger passed away, another one would be replaced. Always they were led by messengers, or they had messengers amongst them. Subhanallah. This is a huge favor, huge blessing. So this is the same thing. Allah is the one who sends those favors and blessings and chooses the prophets and the messengers from whoever He wills, from His perfect knowledge and wisdom. So this continues amongst who? It's not determined by ethnicity, or by which tribe you're from, or which lineage you're from, or which community you're from, or which geographical location you happen to be in. What is it determined by? It is determined by His perfect knowledge and wisdom, but it moves along history with the believers from whichever nation, whichever color, whichever language, whichever geographical location they may be from. It is not restricted to any specific race, ethnicity, language. It moves, it's universal. It moves from people to people, place to place, language to language, according to the wisdom of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And all of them are believers, those who believe. Not just your tribe, not just your religious people, religious community. No. Allah is not restricted to that. Therefore, if this is the case, then who is the greatest human being? Who is most deserving of this? If you look at it from the criteria that they are judging, we are more worthy, we are more close, we are better, etc. No, the greatest human being is Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He is the most fearing of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He has the highest qualities of human characteristics. He has the highest moral manners. He is the highest in humility and surrender to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If all of those past messengers and communities deserved messengers and wahi, isn't Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam the greatest of Allah's creation? Isn't he worthy of messengership? Isn't he worthy of receiving revelation? So this is how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala questions and refutes and rebukes them. That you are not making sense. You are being illogical in your thinking, in your argument, in your disbelief, in your rejection. So it is Islam and Muslims. Muslims meaning believers from all ages, but in the final revelation, Islam and the believers, the final group of believers who can rise above this sectarianism. Islam is not closed. Islam is not for one language, one community, one race. As everybody knows, it's obvious. Islam is universal. It's for everyone. It is only the Muslims and Islam that can rise above this sectarianism. We have to be careful. We have to be careful. We have to keep this comprehensive, universal characteristic of Islam. Sometimes we fall into the same trap. Sometimes we fall into the very same trap as the people of the book before us. It's only the believers, the Muslims, who accept all of the messengers from the past, whether they're from Bani Israel, whether they're from the Christians, whether they're from other nations. It's only the believers. They rise above this group, cult, sectarian mentality. Why? Because it's one deen, one God, one Allah, one message, one truth throughout history. So if you rise up to it and obey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, surrender, then you too will be the beloved of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You too will be showered with favors and blessings from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, regardless of your color, of your ethnicity, of your language, etc., etc. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala further explains that He gave the descendants of Ibrahim alayhi salam the book and the wisdom, and He gave them a huge kingdom. But even after that, فَمِنْهُمْ مَنْ آمَنَ بِهِ وَمِنْهُمْ مَنْ صَدَّ عَنْهُ وَكَفَى بِجَهَنَّمَ سَعِيرًا. Yet, even after all of that, they're upset. Why did Allah send a messenger from the Arabs? Why could He be from our people? But yet you had all of that. You had messengers from your people. You had books. Not only that, you had great authority in the land. You had power, dominion. You had great miracles, signs. فَمِنْهُمْ مَنْ آمَنَ بِهِ. Yet some believed in him. Bihi here can refer to a couple of things. وَمِنْهُمْ مَنْ صَدَّ عَنْهُ. While others turned away from him or it. وَكَفَى بِجَهَنَّمَ سَعِيرًا. So again, they're not, their logic is being challenged and destroyed. Because even if Allah sent someone amongst you as a final messenger, some of you would disbelieve in him. Because you did in the past. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala here, فَمِنْهُمْ مَنْ آمَنَ بِهِ. So from amongst them, yet some believed in him, means, some people say it means this he, bihi, could refer to it. You can translate it as he or it. So if you translate it as it, meaning some of them believed in the favors and bounties that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent the previous nations, the descendants of Ibrahim alayhi salam, meaning the prophets, the books, kingship, etc. Or some said it refers to Ibrahim alayhi salam himself as a prophet. So فَمِنْهُمْ مَنْ آمَنَ بِهِ, i.e. so some of them believed in him, i.e. Ibrahim alayhi salam. وَمِنْهُمْ مَنْ صَدَّ عَنْهُ. While others turned away from it or him by disbelieving in it, ignoring it or ignoring him, and hindering people from its path. Although this bounty was for them, this whole lineage of prophethood and messengers and books and miracles, this was all for their people. But they disputed with their own prophets. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala again is consoling the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam that they did this with their own messengers from amongst them. So why should you be surprised, O Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, if they do that with you? You're not even from amongst them. You're not even from amongst them. So they have more reason to do this against you. So don't worry. Right? Mujahid said, فَمِنْهُمْ مَنْ آمَنَ بِهِ. Here, this dhamir ha refers to, or who refers to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That some of them believed in Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and whilst others rejected him. This is another interpretation. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is consoling the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam that they rejected you because of their disbelief, and this is nothing new. They also rejected their forefathers, rejected people that were sent as prophets to them as well, with clear signs, clear miracles, with wahi. They also rejected. So don't think that if a messenger was sent amongst them, that all of them would have believed. And you are not from amongst them. So therefore, it's even far further fetched that they would believe in you. So don't be disappointed if they do not believe in you. This is consolation for the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam for the pain and hurt caused by their mocking and rejection and criticisms and comments behind the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives a conclusion of what happens to people who reject the messengers, those who prefer injustice, those who prefer encouraging those who worship other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, those who prefer to be miserly, to withhold blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from other people. Those who have all of these characteristics, it could be anybody, whether it's people from the book or others. What happens to them? This is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَكَفَى بِجَهَنَّمَ سَعِيرًا. This is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and enough is hell for burning them. All of the characteristics that were described in the previous ayahs, due to all of that, the end result is what? Is in the hellfire. It becomes no use to them. It benefits them not. All of this plotting and planning and rejection and mocking and insulting the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, due to envy, due to this self-elevation, it benefits them not. The end result is the hellfire. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala threatens them with the hellfire because of their rebellion, disbelief, and defiance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, His books and His messengers. So you can see here one of the significant features of the Qur'an is that, which many people don't realize unless they read the tafsir or they study regularly, is that the Qur'an, much of it is revolving around the life of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Some people think only, most people know that actually the Prophet Muhammad himself by name is only mentioned a few times in the whole Qur'an. So people from that imagine most of the Qur'an is not about the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But if you look where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is directly addressing the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, sometimes by saying qul, say, this is sometimes addressing the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Or sometimes like this, addressing those who are plotting against him, or the enemies, or other communities, how they're reacting to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This is also about the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Most of the Qur'an, not all of it, a lot of the Qur'an revolves around the life of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and acts as a direct guide, a counsel, a comfort, motivation, a reassurance, and a companion to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. You will find this in every surah. You will find this, whether Surah Baqarah, Surah Ali Imran, we covered a lot of the battles that happened, a lot of the incidences that took place. These are all around the context, situation of what the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was facing in different stages of his life. This aspect itself is a sign, is an ayah of the Qur'an. This is also a miracle. It's impossible for a human being to address all of the psychological challenges and context and situation that was developing around the Prophet ﷺ and the community of believers, in terms of how others saw him, how they reacted, what they were saying, what they were plotting, what they were planning, and then to add factual history about the past, prophecies, this will happen, that will happen, believers will come back to Mecca, Mecca will be conquered. All of this revolving around guiding, comforting, reassuring the Prophet ﷺ and by extension the believers. It's impossible for a human being to write this. This is also one of the miracles of the Qur'an, which is missed by many. No human being could provide these truths, wisdoms, prophecies, etc. at every turn and every stage of the life of the Prophet ﷺ. And it's always appropriate, relevant, and it's always true. You won't find a mismatch, whether it's in Mecca, the ayahs that were coming down and talking about the polytheists, the mushrikun, etc., etc., and how the believers were and the Prophet ﷺ, what he should do, or whether it's in Medina, when it's all opened up and you're dealing with different tribes, different nations, different religious groups. It's always accurate, it's always truthful, it's always full of wisdom. It's always the most appropriate counsel, the most appropriate guidance. This is a miracle. This is an absolute miracle. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that He has not left anything out of this Qur'an. He says, we have not left anything out of this Qur'an. Meaning, there's nothing from the guidance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He has left out in this Qur'an. Everything you need to be guided for hidayah is in the Qur'an. Everything you need to be guided at every situation, it's in the Qur'an. But is this only for the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or is it only for the Sahaba? No, it's for us too. So whatever we're facing in our lives, and one of the problems is much of the Qur'an, or at least a good portion of the Qur'an, is addressing the Prophet ﷺ and the believers whilst they are struggling to implement, to follow, to obey and surrender to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And they are in that struggle. They are living for the deen. They are sacrificing for the deen. Their thinking is how to live as believers, how to establish Islam, And therefore, so many of the ayahs are so relevant for them. Problem with us is we've put deen and Islam to one side. We live for the dunya. We're Muslim by name, by culture, by identity, and we are hardly in that struggle. We are hardly in that living for the deen, to change ourselves, to better ourselves, to improve our communities, our families, our friends, our societies. We're not living that life, and therefore sometimes we miss out on the guidance of the Qur'an. We can't relate to it. But if you're living that life of learning, of struggling, of invitation, of da'wah, calling others to the deen, of islah, reformation, reforming society, if you're involved in that, then the Qur'an, most of the Qur'an will all of a sudden become so relevant to you. But even if you're not, there's so much of the Qur'an which is absolutely relevant to each and individual person. Even if you are not doing this global or community work and a little bit higher level work, if you like, even if you're trying to live as a believer in your circumstances and trying to establish all of the fara'id, all of the obligatory things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you, then the Qur'an will be definitely relevant to you. But our problem, another problem, is we don't have that relationship with the Qur'an. We don't have that relationship with the Qur'an. The Salaf, they used to say that we consider anyone who doesn't finish a whole reading of the Qur'an within 30 days, we consider that a deficiency. They looked down on that. They saw that as something negative, something of a shortcoming. Every 30 days, finish the whole Qur'an. And remember, when they read it, they understood it. It's their language. They were experts in their own language. So we have to renew our intention with the Qur'an. Even if we can't finish it every 30 days, that would be very difficult for many people. But it takes, even if you try it, it will take you 45 minutes, an hour, hour and a bit, hour and a quarter every day to finish one juz. Or if you can't do that, go for half a juz, will take you probably 30 minutes a day, every day. Or if you can't do that, go for a third or a quarter. But whatever happens, have a regular portion that you read regularly. Secondly, read it with translation. Because you can do tilawah, but you're not going to get the understanding. Tilawah is fine, you get the rewards, every letter you get 10 rewards, but you're missing out on the whole goal, objective, the whole purpose of the Qur'an. Read it with translation. So even if you finish the Qur'an every 6 months, every 4 months, and you keep going on that cycle, you will find that the Qur'an is speaking to you, the Qur'an is guiding you, the Qur'an is giving you reassurance, the Qur'an is consoling you, the Qur'an is giving you hope, the Qur'an is improving your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In this way, we can really return back to what the original purpose of the Qur'an was, which is to guide hudal linnas, which is as a guide for humanity. So we'll stop here today, inshallah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us tawfiq to understand and follow and regularly read and build our relationship with the Qur'an. Inshallah, we'll stop here today. If there's any questions anyone has, we can take briefly questions. If not, we can stop here, inshallah. If there are any new brothers here, Brother Khairul is here. We have a WhatsApp group. You can join the group. You can give your number and join the group. We make the announcements for time changes. We put the link for the recordings here as well, or any announcements. You can keep up to date, inshallah. For now, I think it's going to stay after Maghrib. Might change to Asr. Not sure yet. We'll announce it on the group, inshallah. And also they'll announce it in the masjid. Jazakumullah khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Subhanakallahumma bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Salam.